it's in the breaking we come unbound. And it's in the giving we are found. Yeah, you could barely change.
Welcome to A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, a podcast dedicated to the telling of authentic stories and the sharing of insightful wisdom, exploring science and spirituality, medicine and Mother Nature. No topic is off limits when it comes to growing our personal understanding and supporting our collective well-being. With your host, Dr. Rob Abbott, a family medicine resident practicing spiritually focused and evolutionarily informed functional medicine, we hope to nourish your being so that you can flourish in whatever the moment has called for you to do.
And I know you tried.
In episode 57 of A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, I have a deeply nourishing conversation with one of the most authentic healers I know, nutritionist and women's health expert, Laura Schoenfeld. Laura has a fascinating background, bringing a rigorous formal education in public health and dietetics into the world of integrative and ancestral wellness, working alongside Chris Kresser to help mobilize the ancestral health movement through dogma and initial growing pains. Laura has been finding her own way beyond Paleo, incorporating her Christian faith and desire to help women find freedom and wellness outside of just food. In this conversation, we begin by hearing about Laura's early childhood and her spiritual roots, as well as her beginnings in the health space, expanding her interest in psychology from her undergraduate education into her pursuit of an education in public health and nutrition. From there, Laura leads us deeper into the flowering of her faith, the origin of intentional and deep friendships that allowed her to accelerate her spiritual and personal growth. Laura opens up about the process of bringing her faith in Christ into her work, sharing how she works professionally with individuals seeking to grow spiritually, all the while remaining authentic to her values every step of the way. Acknowledging her own spiritual challenges, Laura describes how she has found a personal, professional clarity coming from a foundation of faith. Expanding upon a personal biblical verse, Laura shares how she has been able to value her own needs as well as others and keep integrity to her clinical and personal approach. And with that, let's dig into the show. Well, Laura, thank you really so much for taking some time today to share in a conversation. I'm really, really excited just to hear more about your story and hear more about your work and the direction God's taking you. And so thank you for spending some time this morning with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
It's funny, when I've been in the podcasting space more as a listener than an actual host for, really only been doing it for about 2 years now. But before that, there was this 4-year period of just listening to podcasts. And your voice, your presence was one of the first ones that came into my life. And just, I loved your work. I loved what you were doing and putting out into the world. And so it just sort of came up in my life recently. I was like, man, I need to reach out and just connect with this human being at a personal level. And so I've just been really moved by your work, and would love if you wanted to just share perhaps a little bit about yourself for the audience. And I know you've gone through iterations, and as we were talking about before we even started, sort of in a phase of like exploration and growth and where am I headed next. But I'd love if you want to share a little bit about yourself to start us off.
Yeah, sure. And I really appreciate hearing that our podcast was so influential for you. And it's funny, I was reading some personality stuff recently, and I don't know if people know like the Myers-Briggs stuff or the Enneagram, and I was literally looking at the combination of the Enneagram number that I am and the Myers-Briggs letters that I am, and reading about how those interact. And I was telling my husband about it. He's like, you really do a lot of looking into like personality stuff. And I told him, well, with my particular combination, I'm an Enneagram 4 and an INFP for the Myers-Briggs. And I was like, literally, they were saying that my core driver is like self-knowledge. So I was like, okay, well, it kind of makes sense. So I just think it's funny because I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever get to a place where I'm just like, this is my path and this is what I'm doing. So I've kind of learned to accept that I'm always reflecting and making sure that I'm still aligned with what I'm doing. But just as far as like a general overview of where I've come from and where I'm at now with the work that I do, I was raised in a household that followed more of like a Weston Price diet starting around the age of, I think I was 12 when we started making that transition. And my mom had always been into nutrition, but she kind of went from like the standard healthy, and I'm using air quotes, like healthy American diet to thinking about like real food and not being afraid of fat and getting like raw milk and that kind of thing. And so it was a big transition for our family at that point. But then once we got used to it, it was just the way that we ate. And so fast forward to college, I was in college for, I did my degree in psychology. So I was doing a lot of research on specifically like motivation and personality psychology, big surprise, right? And also just like health behaviors and how our health behaviors are affected by just various inputs and how to make decisions better. So I was doing research on that. So there was a general health bent to the psych side of stuff that I was doing. But from a personal perspective, I was living with a bunch of girls at the time that were like not on the spectrum of healthy eating. Either they were chronic dieters or they just ate whatever. And there was a lot of, kind of like, I would say good natured, but sometimes it got a little annoying when people were constantly asking me about what I was eating and not asking about it, but kind of being like, why are you eating that? Ew, that smells weird. Like, why are you using so much salt? Like one of these things where over time you're just like, can you just like stop asking me like why I'm eating what I'm eating? So it kind of brought to a head the fact that the way I ate was different than other people. And at first, when the questions were out of curiosity, I was actually super passionate about sharing my knowledge just from what I'd learned growing up. And around, I'm trying to think what year it would have been, probably around like 2011 was when I started to get more interested in the actual like science behind nutrition. I entered into the UNC Masters of Public Health and Registered Dietitian training program at the August of 2011. So I was in grad school. I started working for a person named Chris Kresser, who some of your audience may be familiar with, and he was a big influence on just my opportunity to learn about more of the functional side of medicine and medical treatment. So I was learning from him and the work I was doing with him, and then I was also learning more of the conventional public health nutrition side of the equation in the clinical dietetics world. So that was kind of an interesting experience because on one hand, I was starting to get somewhat indoctrinated into the paleo mindset. And looking back, I was definitely dogmatic in that direction, trying to fight the dogma in the other direction. And so it was kind of like, I believed that carbs were physiologically unnecessary and that like saturated fat is everybody should eat as much as they want of it and all that. So, so during that time, I was kind of getting two sides of the story. And looking back, I don't think either side was 100% accurate. I think Chris Kresser was a great mentor because he's very balanced and fairly neutral about stuff. Like he just wants to find the right answer. He's not married to any sort of philosophy. But just having like the paleo world being so extreme on one end and then the conventional nutrition world being the other extreme. And then being in a program where there was a lot of just when you're in a nutrition program, a lot of people have weird things around food. And I would say that I personally had some weird things around food just with the desire to control my appearance using my diet. So looking a certain way, having a certain level of fitness, maintaining a certain weight. This was before I got saved. So I got saved in 2012. And so a lot of my focus was on like being good enough and being impressive and being like, worthy of people's attention and influence and love and that kind of thing. So once I got saved in 2012, that kind of set me off on a path of learning more about God, about Jesus, about, what God's desire is for us in general, and then also what God's desire is for me personally. And that has always kind of like threaded its way through my nutrition learning and practice. I graduated from grad school in 2013 and started my private business in 2014. So about, I guess I'm going into my 6th year of running my own business. And over time, just started to get a lot more clarity around what I liked helping people with, who I liked serving, what I felt like my message was, and recognizing how much disordered eating and disordered mindset there is in the world of functional medicine, nutrition, that kind of thing, wellness. So what I've come to at this place in my life at this point is just a desire to, I always think of it, because the reason why I'm hesitating is because I'm always trying to keep myself engaged in the nutrition world, because sometimes I get to this place where I'm so sick of talking about nutrition.
Like, I'm done with this.
Yes, I'm just going to go do something else. But what keeps me coming back to it is the belief that part of my purpose, not my whole purpose, but part of my purpose being in this community is to bring light into what I consider a fairly dark world when it comes to health and fitness and that kind of thing. So at this stage of my career, what my passion is really helping women who are struggling with not eating disorders in the sense that they need to be like hospitalized or anything like that, but they're struggling with a lot of disordered thinking around food. They're very perfectionist with their diet. They maybe lean towards orthorexia in a lot of ways. The way that they think about their food and their fitness and their health habits is more of a they're trying to fix themselves, or they're trying to be good enough, or they don't listen to their own intuition about things well. They're always being influenced by other people. And, they listen to podcasts, they read books, they read blogs, and it's like all of this information that then makes it hard for them to trust their own judgment when it comes to their choices. So my passion right now is helping women who are in that space really get a lot of clarity around what does work for their bodies with their food, their fitness, their self-care activities, and also digging into more of the self-love and pursuit of purpose elements that I truly believe will replace that obsession with nutrition once they figure out what works best for them. So that's kind of where I'm at now as far as the work that I'm doing. And it's fun because I get to combine my knowledge of nutrition and physiology and all the things that do help our bodies function better with my, constant learning about just self-knowledge and spiritual development, self-development, personal development, that kind of thing. And just giving them a path to actually experience more joy in their lives and more excitement, and looking at their health as being a tool to experience a fuller life as opposed to their identity. So there's a lot of information, but that's kind of the very nutshell version of my path. And then, like I said before, I'm an explorer, and I'm kind of one of those people that's always finding new things to be interested in. So check back with me in a couple of years. That might have changed.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to unpack there, and hopefully we can sort of weave through that story, because it's just, it's fascinating to me. It's always fascinating to me to sort of see how people, end up at this point. And I think most children, most families probably don't grow up in a Weston A. Price home. I certainly didn't grow up that way. I wish more did. And it's interesting to see just whether it was even transitioning from unhealthy to healthy, healthy to unhealthy, any kind of nutritional approaches. I find it fascinating. That's a radical, when you're 12 and suddenly just went from maybe eating this to, that must have been just a huge shift. And then, one of my first thoughts was, I was going to say you're an ENFP, but I guess INFP is probably also a reasonable thing too. And I also love some of the Enneagram stuff, just to compliment. I totally, personality hacker and those folks, some really interesting things. Because I kind of want to understand why we do the things that we do. Why do we make the decisions that we do, and what makes us all unique. I wanted to step back though a little bit from, because you mentioned some aspects of your childhood and maybe the nutritional focus and the focus, and it sounds like it was a very tight group, but perhaps faith, or at least the Christian faith, wasn't something that was a center of your life yet. But was curious, what was your spiritual upbringing like? What was that like in your home and outside of the home as a child?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's not complicated, but it's, I think there was probably things going on behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of as far as my parents were concerned. But from my perception as a child, there wasn't any formal religious or spiritual teaching growing up. And as far as I know, and again, parents don't necessarily share everything with their children, so I don't want to speak for my parents, but as far as I know, up until the last few years, my dad might have considered himself an atheist. He comes from a Jewish family, hence my last name being Schoenfeld. So he, at best, was agnostic, possibly atheist, certainly wasn't thinking about it very clearly in our family. And then my mom came from a Catholic family, kind of I don't think she aligned with Catholicism. And, there's a lot of stuff in Catholicism that can create a lot of shame. And I'm not saying that Catholicism is bad. It's just if it's in the wrong environment, then, that can drive a lot of you're not a good person and you need to, repent or whatever, and then you'll be a good person. So I think she kind of strayed from Catholicism, but then has kind of had an interesting path exploring other perspectives on Christianity. And then fast forward to probably the last 5 to 10 years, I think my parents both have committed to Christianity. I'm still a little unclear about what their beliefs are, and I think we do have some conflict of beliefs as far as things within Christianity, like the Trinity and, Jesus, is he God or is he not God? Just lots of stuff that I don't necessarily need to go into. But as you can see, it was a little bit of a disjointed spiritual upbringing, and, a lot of different influences where I had my Jewish atheist side of the family. I had my Catholic, but not super spiritual Catholic side of the family. And then my parents who were together figuring it out for themselves together, I'm sure. And then us kids were kind of just living the normal American kid life. So I feel like for me personally, I don't think I ever would have considered myself an atheist. I think I always believed in God. I think it just wasn't something that was a priority to me when I was growing up. And then there was a period of time in college where I was a little bit more everybody's got a piece of the truth and, everybody's got, answers. And I didn't really have any conviction at that point. It was just kind of okay, well, I believe in God, but who's to say that Hinduism isn't accurate in some way, or Buddhism isn't accurate in some way, or whatever other religion you might think of. So I didn't really have any strong spiritual upbringing until I would say my family started shifting more towards Christianity. And then I started to think about it more and went through some tough stuff. And a lot of it comes back to what I said before about that desire to be considered worthy or valuable or good enough for others. Because I was very shy growing up. I didn't have a lot of friends. I played sports, but a lot of times, even on the sports team, the relationships that I had were kind of a little mean girly, getting made fun of and trying to fit in, that kind of thing. So for a long time, I just didn't feel like I fit in. Again, kind of classic Enneagram 4, feeling like nobody understands me. And so it was kind of one of these things where I was constantly looking for outside approval, and something just kind of snapped in me around 2012 where I decided I was sick of living that way and I wanted something different. So that's what led me to Christ. And then from there, it's just been this journey of learning who God is and what God's plan is for all humans and me. And then also, lately it's been a combination of seeing the world of entrepreneurship and the kind of things that people are teaching from a secular or like, a different spiritual bent, and thinking about like, how does that actually apply to what the Bible says and what God says? So it's been kind of cool because I've worked with like a Christian business coach recently, and just starting to look at, it's not just about like being accepted, which is great. That's got to be the foundation, is feeling accepted, but then it's moving into a place of what power do we have now on earth? Like what's possible for us, and what can I experience in life because of my faith and because of trusting God and because of, engaging in the power that's available. So it's been kind of a fun experience to be like, hey, this is not just about like me feeling like I'm not a failure of a person. This is actually like, there's so many cool things that I can experience because of God. So it's been a lot more fun in the last couple of years. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I'm a talker, so you'll have to keep me focused.
No, it's so wonderful. Oh my gosh. I have chills like hearing it, because I grew up, my parents, wonderful people, more so scientific, rational folks. And I think I was around 7 or 8 years old, and was playing sports, played soccer, and we played soccer on the weekends. So church wasn't a practical thing. Not that it was something it was a family thing to do anyway, and sort of walked away from it and didn't have like a bad experience or anything with it. It just wasn't part of my life. And but sort of went into college and had an experience with my grandmother, who was just wonderful Christian, and her passing away, and spent some time while she was in hospice. And I went back and joined this Baptist ministry group. Really, there's more people who weren't Baptist. It was just a group of friends, and had a Bible study. And it was one of the things that radically changed my college experience. And unfortunately, I was still a little too driven with medicine, perfection, working, and it just, like all things, sort of like fell away. And it wasn't until just a ridiculous awakening in medical school, taking time away. Interestingly enough, in all honesty, one of the biggest events actually happened on the UNC campus. I was actually a patient in the neuroscience, like the psychiatric hospital. Crazy experience. And I came back, and it was like this weight lifted off. It's like, I don't have to do anything to receive this love, and I don't have to do anything for myself. And it was this huge relief. People talk about a monkey being taken out. It was like 10,000 monkeys. It was just this huge weight. And went back, and I'd been christened, baptized technically when I was a baby, but it didn't mean anything. And I went back and joined my church youth ministry, and I was like, I want to get baptized. This is what I'm committing to. And there's I love the medicine stuff. Loving the nutrition and helping people with that. But there's something about walking folks through that journey to that spiritual awakening that just, it brings chills every single time. I would gladly do that over getting someone to eat a better diet any day. There's so much deeper meaning there. And so when I'm following you and seeing just your deep vulnerability, and everything that you do in your work, and having this is who I am. If you don't like it, good, cool. This is who I am. I don't need your approval. I have God, I have Christ, and I don't know. It's just been really, really warm to sort of see a somewhat similar parallel, journey in both the health space, but also with your faith. And I was just kind of curious, as things have grown, has there been was there a particularly formative experience, or someone who was particularly influential during that period, or since you kind of committed yourself to Christ, that's been that you'd want to share about?
So I'm part of a church plant that the pastor and his family and a bunch of their friends moved from Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To Raleigh. Mm-hmm. And I actually met the pastor at a meetup group called Beer and a Bible. And at that time when I met him, they were just meeting at a friend's house. doing like a Saturday night worship and hang out and kind of like home church kind of thing. And at that time, I had just moved to Raleigh from Chapel Hill, and I was having a little bit of a hard time making friends, and was going to a different church, but it was I guess it's a mega church. I hate using that word because it sounds like it's a good church. It's just very large.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was just going on Sunday and like, yeah, saying hi to people. Everyone was nice, but I would leave, and it was kind of like, all right, well, now I'm back to my kind of lonely, like not really having deep relationships experience. So I met my now pastor Jeremy at this event, and he invited me to that home group. And so I was like, all right, whatever, I'll go see what happens.
Yeah.
And found out that their intention was to create a new church in the Raleigh area. And so the people that I met at that small home group event were just some of the most like genuine, nice, like, and when I say nice, not like just, you know the difference between someone being nice and actually like wanting to have a relationship. And I don't know if I'm sure other people can empathize with this, but when you're in your late 20s, 30s, like it's difficult to make friends because everybody's got their own lives. Like a lot of people are married. And so these people were very, very intentional about creating relationships. And it was like I met other people that now I could be like, okay, we can like create a relationship now because it's not just me putting the effort in, they're meeting that effort. So that was back in late 2014. And then since then we launched our church, and it's been growing, but I've been closely involved with the leadership and a lot of the women in the church as well, like the leadership and their wives. And it's been a really awesome experience because I have some girlfriends who they're about the same age or even younger, but their faith is like more mature than mine. So I see them as being like mentors and friends. Mm-hmm. And so they've been a great way for me to start to develop more like understanding of the word and understanding of God and all that. And, getting comfortable with things like raising my hands during worship, which at first I was like, this is so weird. So just kind of like opening myself up to different experiences and different like levels, I guess. Yeah. So that church, the church is called Vertical Life, and we're in Holly Springs now. But they've just been an amazing influence and really, really supportive of my personal growth. And, one of the complaints I feel like a lot of people have against Christianity is like the potential for sexism in that, however it's set up. Yeah. And something that I've loved about our church is that they really value women's presence and women's leadership and, looking at women as equals and not like, oh, the men are in charge and you women just go take care of the kids. So that's been really awesome to have my leadership encouraged. And then also, I met my husband in 2016. And so he has been Christian pretty much his whole life. I think he got saved when he was 7, and he has a very mature faith as well. So having been married to him almost 2 years now, like we spend a lot of time developing our own faith, but then also we do devotionals in the evening a lot of times. So we kind of like come together and learn from each other and have conversations about that. So he's a great influence. And it's funny, just having gotten married in our 30s, like he's going to be 39 this year. I feel like we are kind of our own people, and that's fine. Yeah. But then we have the opportunity to, help each other grow. So it's a cool relationship where like we've developed our own path, but then we're kind of like walking together now. So he's been a great influence as well. And then, like I said, I'm working with a Christian business coach now. Her name is Sarah Anna Powers, and she's awesome because she can take all of the faith piece and then apply it to the pursuit of a profitable business. So I would say those have been my biggest influences in the past, I guess, 5 years since I really started taking this stuff more seriously. Yeah.
Well, there's something about, and it's one of my deep core beliefs, and I think it really came out of Rick Warren, and one of, I just listened to, he's just a great guy to listen to. If you're like feeling down, just listen to him preach. But, he totally lives this authentic life of, I've I've been given what I've been given. One, because I've worked for it, but two, because God knows I'm going to give it back. And so I love that alignment of entrepreneurship. Like, go for these things. Like, don't see it as you're envious or you're wanting money. Like, if you can create a space, a business that provides for you, gives you safety, gives you love, and you can give that back, He's going to provide for you in those ways. So I've always, believed that, being humble, but having that, that drive to align those values of that entrepreneurship with, Christian faith, like, you're going to be provided by more and more because He knows you're going to give it back to people. And one of the other things I was like, when you were talking, I was kind of curious, and this always comes up. I mean, it's a constant daily practice for me. Is how do we incorporate our personal faith in our professional work? And it can get a little bit charged. I think I've read some interesting articles. I think one of the titles of the articles I read was asking doctors, well, do you pray with patients? And some people were just like adamantly, no, that is so unprofessional, like that you cannot do that. And other people are like, heck yeah, I'm gonna do that. And it may seem clear, like if someone's a chaplain, okay, they're holding that space. Pastor, they're holding that kind of space. But what about someone who maybe doesn't have formal training? Is it okay to enter into a spiritual conversation? And personally, I engaged in that dialogue with folks in the hospital, and I tried to take that open view, just like a chaplain would. I might have a personal belief system; it might not be the same as theirs, but we can sit together and grow through that. And was just kind of curious how, maybe you're as a registered dietitian, maybe it's not something that's like as charged as maybe in the in the strictly medical world. But I was curious how you're building that into your work with individuals, either as a single individual or as a group.
Yeah. So I'm sure I have a different kind of business since mine, even though I am technically a medical professional, I really operate more as a coach in a lot of ways. So I probably don't have quite the level of, implications if I make one toe out of line, as opposed to somebody who's working in a hospital. Yeah. But from a private business perspective, the first step was really not being worried about turning people off by sharing my faith. Yeah. The caveat is obviously, if I was writing things on my social media that was saying that, XYZ person is a sinner and, they need to repent or they're going to hell, like that kind of stuff obviously would be kind of inappropriate. Yeah. I don't really care what your job is. I think approaching things that way is inappropriate, but sharing things that I believe that are true, that are also uplifting and, from a place of love and wanting people to feel loved. Like, so sharing those things, if somebody gets pissed off and says, oh, I thought you were a scientist, like now you're talking about God, you're an idiot. I just kind of decided that I didn't care if they thought that. And honestly, a lot of that's come from my education in the business side of the equation, because polarity is actually a good business strategy, which sounds odd maybe to some people, but basically drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe, like that will repel people, but equally it will attract the right people.
You can't be friends with everybody. I mean,
right. Yes. So I'm not desiring to repel non-Christians. I would desire to repel people who are offended by Christianity or think I'm an idiot for believing in God. I don't want to work with someone who thinks I'm stupid because I have faith. Yeah. So repelling those people completely, whatever. And it was fine. It was funny because when I started getting a little bit more vocal about that, I did have some people that said, oh, I can't believe you're saying this. You're going to ruin your business. You're so stupid for doing this. And I was like, I'm not going to ruin my business. But if you're less confident and you're getting people saying that, you might think, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if I bring Jesus into my business? Yeah. It's going to be ruined. Clearly God doesn't want me to be successful. So anyway, first was kind of repelling the people who would be offended by it and attracting more of the people who are drawn to it. And honestly, a lot of the people that I work with are not actually Christian. They're not against Christianity. They're not like, a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, but they, maybe they're a spiritual seeker. Maybe they believe in God, but maybe they're like I was in college, where it was like, everybody's got a piece of the truth. So I wasn't worried about repelling the wrong people. So that was kind of step one, is like make my message clear so that way nobody's shocked when they want to work with me and then they find out I'm a Christian and they think, oh, this woman must be an idiot if she's believes in God. And then so after that, just thinking about how I can incorporate it into the work that I do more. One thing I did was I added a question on my intake form. Do you have a religious or spiritual practice that's important to you? And then yes or no. And then if yes, is that something you'd like to incorporate into the work that we do together? And so it's giving people permission to say yes. They also have permission to say no. And if I see someone that has said yes, then I'm going to be more likely to bring that topic up in conversation than if they say no. And maybe they're Christian, but their faith is private and they don't want to have that conversation. And so if they say no, I don't bring it up. Or if I do bring it up, it's in the context of like, well, here's from my perspective, like, because I'm a Christian, here's how I see that topic. So, so it's one of these things where I invite people to have that conversation with me if they desire to, but I would never force it on someone. So I think when we think about like consent and appropriateness, it always comes down to what does the patient or the client want? If the client wants to be prayed over by their doctor, then why should you withhold that? If the client doesn't, then you're just respecting them by not doing that. And maybe you're praying silently to yourself about the interaction that you're having with that person, but you're not, forcing it on them or making them uncomfortable by imposing your beliefs or your, your spiritual practice on them. So I think, nobody that I work with is shocked that I am Christian. And I do work with a lot of Christians who, we talk about their faith in our conversations, and it's part of the approach that we're taking. And then beyond that, some of the really just the main group program that I'm running currently, that one, this was actually something I talked through with my business coach pretty in depth, because I was trying to figure out, do I want to make this a program for Christians, or do I want to make this a program for everybody and, be almost more like an opportunity to evangelize? So when I say evangelize, like, I'm not pushing Jesus on people, like, hitting them across the head with a Bible. It's like, hey, you know what I stand for, and you can see the peace in my life, and I can explain where that comes from. And if that's something that you are interested in, here's more information. So I ended up deciding that what I'm going to do with this group program is, from an actual presentation perspective, I'm going to have the health content and the mindset work be fairly, faith neutral. But then I'm adding a bonus training that's faith-based. So that way it's available, but people don't have to do it as part of the program. But it's going to be included, so it's there. And then from a marketing perspective, I might have to take a couple different angles. The way that I market my programs, there will be like a different target audience, and I might just start with the Christian audience first, just to kind of like get that in there. But then I might create a separate type of marketing campaign for someone who's not Christian. So I'm kind of straddling things a little bit, but my feeling is like I'm 100% open about my faith, and I'm not worried about repelling the wrong people. And when I say wrong people, they're not bad people. They're just not who I want to work with. They're just not for me. And then I'm helping Christians incorporate their faith into their health practices, and then I'm helping non-Christians see the value of faith in their health practices potentially. So that's kind of where I'm at currently.
That's really beautiful. And yes, it's certainly an exploration and sort of navigating how can I potentially help all different types of people at the stage they're at with that journey, whether it's maybe they haven't got out of the gates or they're years into it and wanting to grow and incorporate something new. I think it's really wonderful just to hear the practical nature and just the deliberateness by which you're going through this process, and how knowing that this is a huge thing to one ask of anyone to begin with, but to step into that and being really deliberate and authentic about it. It's really, really, really wonderful. And I love the questions too. And that's exactly what I've noticed, or, how I've sought to engage with, patients. And when I was even in the hospital setting with families, and while I was in a very rural area, and you could almost guarantee that, yes, everyone here was, a Christian, like, you didn't necessarily know if they wanted prayer in that moment, because perhaps they're in the hospital and they feel like they're here because they did something wrong and God is punishing them, and they're walking away from God at this moment. And so you coming in and, praying for them actually wasn't going to be a good thing. And if you didn't ask permission, you didn't, walk into that space, you're going to create something much more challenging. And so I love those, two super simple questions, yet really profound on the intake to engage, like, first, a reflection of, what is my practice? And then two, am I willing to be vulnerable enough to walk and grow with this individual who I'm seeking to partner with? I'd love, just in those two simple questions, how much information. I kind of want to tweak some of the things I have in my questionnaire based off of those questions. And so I guess that's a completely segue away from some of the spiritual practice, but curious. And you mentioned a couple of things earlier in the very beginning of the podcast, things that you see women and people more broadly struggling with, or what you've seen folks struggling with, and maybe the orthorexic eating pattern being something that's troublesome. And one of the things that I wanted to get your reflections on, or what I sort of heard, was potentially that's just filling a void for this deeper, maybe lack of spiritual meaning, or just lack of meaning in general. So we attach to food or pick another habit. And curious how you're walking through and navigating that, and if there are other things that you've noticed that people are kind of filling in that void with or struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because, like I said, I have some Christian clients and some non-Christian clients. So normally with the Christian clients, it comes from more of a combination of perfectionism and desire for control. Mm-hmm. And I say that as a recovering perfectionist and control freak. And when I say control freak, it's funny. I never thought I was until...
You don't know when you're in it.
Right. It's like you don't realize it until things start to become more adult. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm actually in charge of this. And if I don't do things right, I'm worried it's going to, all crumble. So in that situation, it's more about kind of reorienting them to what their most important focus should be, and recognizing where health falls in their priorities list, and making sure that health is not becoming basically an idol for them. And health, or when I say health, it's not always just physical health. It's also, for a lot of women, weight loss and physical appearance, and, wanting to fit the mold that they think is, expected of a attractive or healthy woman. Yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with eating in a way or training in a way that changes the way your body looks, but it's like, where is that on your priorities list? And if that's your number one priority, then that's a problem. So it's a little easier when somebody already has that faith, because I can use spiritual truth to speak to them and it makes sense. And they're like, oh, wow, I didn't even think of that. And so it's cool to see that element of things. Because having the functional medicine background, and not that I'm a medical doctor, I've learned functional medicine and more of the supplements and that kind of thing for certain conditions. There are things that can be done to improve a person's health without it having to be something they're obsessed with or that they're over prioritizing. So it's kind of putting health in the right order in their lives. And then when somebody's not Christian, a lot of times it's really working them towards the belief that they don't have to earn their value. Yeah. So I think in our current culture, health is seen as a status symbol. I mean, it kind of is, because there are a lot of disparities in health, and having the means to be healthy or to look healthy is a privilege that wealthier people have more access to. But it's kind of like the new status symbol, just the wellness industry is the new beauty industry, or the new, I don't know what other, men like to have a fancy car, women like to look good in their yoga pants or whatever. Yeah. So I think being able to kind of remove themselves from that rat race when it comes to the wellness piece, and the appearance piece as well, because that's oftentimes tied up in it with their body image and wanting to look a certain way and wanting to, identify as the healthy one. So they have that identity that if they aren't experiencing optimal health or they do start to gain weight, they start to question their whole identity. So when I have a non-Christian client, a lot of times it can be a little limited because obviously I can't have that, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but maybe I'm not able to have that spiritual conversation. Yeah. But I can at least ask them some questions that get them thinking about like why they're putting their identity in this, in being the healthy one or being the fit one. And is that what they really want? And is that really truly their value, or are there things that are more valuable to them that they're actually missing out on because they're overvaluing their health or appearance? So when God's not in the conversation, not that, he's always in the conversation, but he's not necessarily openly in the conversation. A lot of times I'm just getting them to question why they're choosing to behave the way that they are behaving, or why they're choosing to restrict their diet or to exercise too much, or to, be so hyper-focused on their appearance. And that can be very effective for helping women, rearrange their priorities. And again, I'm hoping that at some point that'll spark, a deeper spiritual experience, but at least I can plant the seed and maybe help them see a different way of thinking about the world. Yeah.
Planting seeds is just, I love that metaphor, that analogy for my practice. And it's totally true. And something that came up in reflecting back to, the question, just before this, and how you're working with folks, in that spiritual journey, it's entirely clear, at least to me, in following you and your work, and as we're speaking now, there is no confusion about what your values are, who you are, and how you're going about doing it. And I think going back to what you were talking about, creating polarity, I'm the same way. I don't want there to be any doubt in someone's mind at who I am, what my values are. And I think a lot of where sort of distrust and issues come in this greater health, wellness space is when you don't really know what who that person is. What's their value? Maybe their object that they're selling or their product, but you don't really know. And so in just following your work more broadly, and like I said, having this conversation now, it's radically clear. Like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm here. And I think people resonate to authenticity. And some people in the marketing world will tell you, no, you need to do this. And it's like, I want radical authenticity and leaving no doubts. And I think that's something that you can do without words too, and in your practice. So maybe God's not in the discrete conversation, but you just in your existence. And as you mentioned earlier, when people get a curiosity and they're like, well, why do you do this? Well, actually, let me tell you about it. You just sort of opens this door, and it's really beautiful, and freeing too. Once again, like, I don't have my worth based in something else or an object. I'm inherent. I'm this child of God. And so I've just been seeing that, and it's clear now as we're sort of going through this conversation that's just, pervades your work. And, one of the things that you have on your website, and I wanted to get your thoughts. You mentioned one of your, it sounds like a personal verse from Galatians 1:10, and I'll read it and get your thoughts. Am I now seeking the approval of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. And so I was just curious, what drew you to that verse? And I think it's kind of maybe a little bit of a rhetorical, hypothetical question now at this point, but and how has this been something that you've lived out? So taking these words from the page and put in your life.
Mm-hmm. And before I answer that question, I just want to make sure people know that, like, even though I'm very good at explaining things outwardly, that does not mean that I have no confusion or inner turmoil or anything like that. I think it's a process of, sometimes you don't know what you're what your belief is, or you don't know what you stand for, you don't have that clear direction that you're taking. But my thinking is just take the next step and see, okay, well, how does that feel? Does that step feel good? If not, take a step back, or, go another step forward if it did feel good. So I just want to make sure nobody thinks I'm like, sitting here like I have no, no doubt in my mind and no confusion and never, have any spiritual challenges or anything like that. So, but I think the difference is like, I don't beat myself up for that confusion. It's like,
exactly.
I'm kind of just like, okay, that's where I'm at right now. And I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I trust that if I take a step, like God will tell me if that's wrong, or if it's successful, then I assume that was the right step to take. So it's very much like a act, or I guess the term that a lot of business people will use is action brings clarity. So it's like, you don't necessarily have clarity before you take that step. So just to get back to that question about the verse, that verse it's funny because I have some like a form of that tattooed under my arm here. And I'm saying here because Rob can see it, but, under my left arm. And that was really, I would say, like the concept that brought me to Jesus in the first place was being tired of constantly seeking other people's approval and striving to please them, even above myself. Like, and I'm not saying that our number one goal should be to please ourselves, because obviously that can lead to a very selfish life. But I do think that there's a lot of value in setting healthy boundaries and not doing everything to make other people happy, to be popular, to be seen as successful, to be seen as cool or attractive or whatever. So I think for me, a lot of times that verse always has to come back into the conversation with anything that I'm doing, because I am prone to people pleasing in a lot of situations. And so coming from the faith-based perspective, it's kind of learning how to, like I said, how to set clear boundaries, how to get okay with saying no and not feeling guilty about, turning someone away if they're not a good fit, or, saying that's not aligned with my work, so I'm not going to do that. Like, just being able to confidently say no in a loving way. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, that person's not good enough for me. It's more just like, no, they're not aligned. I'm going to make sure that they're working with the appropriate person and not working with me. So being able to set boundaries and, to value my own needs and not to put other people's needs way above mine, or to act outside of integrity to please other people, I'd say is the bigger thing. Because obviously there's sacrifice that has to be made. I'm married. I'm hoping to have a family in the future. And even in marriage, like there's times where I do things that it's not exactly what I want to do, but I do it because I love my husband and I want him to, be above me in certain circumstances. But again, I wouldn't want to do something outside of my integrity or do something that I feel like God would not approve of. So that's a verse that I do have to come back to frequently, because in the world of online business, in the world of health and fitness and nutrition and all that, there is a lot of pressure to do things that maybe wouldn't be in my integrity. Yeah. So as an example, like, when I have a client that comes to me and her number one goal is fat loss, and she's, got like, an inch of belly pooch that she wants to lose, and that's what she wants help with. That is not in my integrity to be helping with that particular goal. And so saying no to working with that person is something that takes a level of, again, just understanding of what God wants me to do, and being able to, turn down money, turn down somebody who wants my help, like being able to say no in that circumstance is actually doing what I feel like God wants me to do, and seeking to please God in the decisions that I'm making. And again, it's not coming from a place of feeling like I have to earn God's love, or that like, if I don't do this, that I'm not saved, or, whatever kind of shame-based mindset you can you can bring into this conversation, but it's more about like, okay, God's opinion of me is the most important, and he knows what's best for me, and I'm working on understanding what his best for me is so that I have better, as we were saying before we jumped on the call, discernment.
Yeah.
I have better discernment of when something's a good idea and when something's not. And I'm totally fine to make sacrifices and to put others' needs above mine, but not in a way that's, again, going against God's desires for my life or my own personal values or boundaries. So it definitely helps in, like I said, the health and fitness world. It helps in the business world where, there's a lot of marketing strategies out there that are not aligned with my beliefs. So it's kind of like learning the practices that are effective, but then filtering it through like, okay, well, how would God want me to operate in this world? So, it's always a work in progress. Like I make mistakes. I there's times where I'll get off the phone with a potential client that I did pitch an offer to, and I'm like praying, oh my gosh, I hope they don't actually take me up on that because I should have said no. Like there's that time as well. But generally I feel like getting more clear about my boundaries and my values and getting the confidence to say no, like I said, turn down money, turn down somebody who's not a good fit, turn down an opportunity that's not aligned. Like just the more I practice it, the better I get at it and the more confidence I have. And then honestly, the more growth I've seen in my business because of it. So it's kind of like a win-win.
Throughout this conversation, I found myself deepening my own connection with God, simply through the telling of another's journey of faith. While many in the ancestral and holistic health space know Laura for her contributions, including podcasts, programs, and blog articles that have helped many find a path towards wellness, this conversation tells a story far beyond these tangible creations, allowing us all to see the faith and heart behind the person desiring to make wellness and healing possible. Perhaps the most poignant piece of wisdom in this entire conversation emerged in the last few moments as Laura acknowledged the power of surrendering control to God and how, as a result of this continual surrender, she finds freedom and nourishment food could never dream to provide. One of my friends, told me, and he was sort of telling this story in a kind of funny context of, he's a third-year, naturopathic medical student, and he was in a clinic, and there's just the guy he was shadowing that day was just a kind of a weird, quirky guy. Just wouldn't approach things in a very different way than my friend would, and we sort of got in this conversation, and someone had actually, made a joke. I was like, well, somebody would like his sense of humor. And, hit us, was like, yeah, there's so many people out there in this healing profession. They're going to be a good fit for somebody. Maybe it's not me. And some of us, want to take that responsibility or feel encouraged to maybe find that right person. So building a network so you can, but at the same time, you don't feel guilty or ashamed if you're not able to help them or you're not the right person, because, there's probably going to be somebody in their own quirky way who's great for your uncle, or whatever. And there's some, freedom there. And another thing, perhaps this is, a good segue. And you had mentioned we all make mistakes. And you talked about a couple of things early on, sort of in the maybe paleo sphere with some of the trying to get away from dogma and then finding yourself maybe in more dogma. And we all make mistakes. And I think it's a beautiful thing, like you mentioned earlier too, it's not about like having to repent and feel guilty and again, like I'm this horrible person. It's moving forward positively and being okay to know you're going to make mistakes. And guess what? You were forgiven before you even made the mistake. But walking in this path of radical authenticity says, I need to look and see what was I doing out of alignment, or what was I doing that was incorrect. And so would love, perhaps if you want to elucidate a few of those areas, maybe strictly professionally, or maybe anything else too that you would like, but anything maybe in the nutritional wellness space that you were doing before and that was maybe a mistake, and how you evolved your approach as part of this journey kind of moving forward.
Well, a super simple example would be the whole carbs thing that I was mentioning when I was in grad school. Because in the conventional nutrition world, it's changing, but the typical education is suggesting that fat is bad and that, just to use a very specific example, when I was in the Masters of Public Health courses, like the public health education courses, we would be learning about these interventions that they would go into schools and change the lunches or, try to get kids eating differently. And it was horrible because you could see all these really well-meaning people who have dedicated their lives to public health and they really want to make a difference. And they're saying how successful these interventions were. And then you look at what the intervention was and it was like, we got these kids drinking skim milk instead of whole milk or 2% as their like intervention. I was like how? That's literally like not helping anybody, if not potentially making things worse. And like everybody's like patting themselves on the back for doing that. And so it was really frustrating to see what I felt was not only like incorrect, but kind of like wasteful effort, right?
Yeah.
Like it's, you're going in and trying to do this change that is not even based in evidence and, is potentially going to cause harm even in these kids.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really frustrating to me. And like you said, I feel like my pendulum swung a little in the other direction where it was like, I was kind of all in on the whole carbs or what makes people fat and you don't need to eat carbs and, you should eat as much fat as you want and everybody should be paleo and gluten's going to kill everybody. And so that extreme swing, it was response to the stuff that I was seeing on the other end of the spectrum, but I would say is not accurate either.
Yeah.
I'm not saying some people don't benefit from low carb or that some people should not eat gluten, but overall, I find that a lot of the people that I work with do just fine eating a fairly mixed, diverse, no single macronutrient restricted diet. And the other challenge is that going that far in that direction actually is creating those eating disorder behaviors. Yeah. So I don't know if any of the work that I did necessarily would have caused somebody to develop an eating disorder because I don't think I was ever that level of dogmatic, but I can see where, in the beginning when I was creating my business and my original business was called Ancestralize Me and it was all about like paleo and eating like our ancestors and that kind of thing. And so coming from that level of extremeness, even though, like I said, it wasn't 10 out of 10 extreme, but it was more extreme than I am now, getting back to this place where I'm like really helping people see the big picture and not overemphasize any one specific nutrient as being bad or good or anything like that. That feels more in alignment with my beliefs about the way nutrition works. And it's one of these things where yes, being engaged in the paleo community and doing all the paleo conferences and going on all the paleo podcasts and all that stuff, like, yeah, that could have been a good way to build my career. And yes, like paleo has a lot of, momentum behind it right now that it could have been helpful to really stick in that community. But I just did not feel like that was, aligned with my beliefs. And a lot of times even just being so heavily indoctrinated with all the evolution stuff. And there was a lot of very aggressive atheism in that community. It just did not feel right to be immersing myself there. So that was a decision to, and I guess it was a kind of decision, kind of like I just didn't feel like in my body, like good being at a lot of those events. And I just kind of like slowly like backed out and was like, never mind, I'm not in this anymore. And it's not that I don't still have friends in that community. I still work with Chris Kresser as one of his teaching assistants for his health coach training program. As I said, with Chris, he's very like balanced and not dogmatic and, tends to be not at the end of that extreme either. But it was a conscious decision to kind of carve my own path there. And I think that's actually been part of why I've been successful, as opposed to being like, I'm just going to be another like paleo person and jump on that bandwagon. So there was a little bit of friction that came from pulling out of that space, because obviously I'd built some level of audience in that area. And, some of that shook out as I was, both pulling out and expressing my faith, my spiritual beliefs more. But it was one of these things where like just knowing with business how much being out of alignment can really be soul sucking when you're doing work that you don't agree with. It's not even like, yes, I want to be giving good information, but like even just wanting to feel, happy about the work that I'm doing. I want to wake up and be excited to do the work. I want to be, every person on my calendar, I want to look and be like, oh, I can't wait to talk to her today. I love working with her. Like that's what I want to experience in my life. And so deciding to let go of some other opportunities or again, kind of draw a line in the sand and say, here's who I'm helping. Yeah. Not only does it make my work more fun and more just life-giving for me, but I also think it's helped really propel my business. So yeah, I don't even know if I was answering your question.
No, you did. Well, and there's never a right or wrong answer anyway. So, you really did. And I think, a couple of things that stuck out to me and what was also kind of earlier in our conversation, but, I just finished reading Viktor Frankl's, Man's Search for Meaning, and just this really wonderful, story and this whole concept of logotherapy being, disease and pathology created from a lack of meaning. And I see so much suffering that is exactly what you just said. People putting energy towards things that they don't really fundamentally, care about. And it certainly was occurring in my residency. I mean, when every day you're waking up doing things and it's not just a psychological thing, it manifests in the body as well. But when you're doing something that's not fully in alignment, it's not effortless, it's not seamless. You don't wake up every single morning and saying, yeah, I want to talk to this person. And so that is a huge barrier, something that I see as a way more important than, food. Yes, we need food to make you feel good about yourself in certain ways and, fuel that endeavor. But, that being a huge issue that gets in the way. And, applaud you for sort of kind of feeling that, being in the body and being in your experience. Be like, you know what, I need to step back from this and discover, because I agree, I love the ancestral framework. I love that, concept. I love it as a starting place. And then I like to layer in, a lot more of the person's personal culture. Like, where did you come from? Okay, wow, maybe dairy is okay for you because this is your, cultural heritage. And also, just really, being with people at any given moment to see, is this a time to go through a learning experience of elimination diet? Or are you in a phase beyond food that it's time to just be outward with your faith, with your social relationships? Like, even if this could be helpful, you're not at that, phase of life now. So it's just really wonderful to see, kind of recognizing, what, these aren't the total things that I feel, in alignment with. And how do I kind of discover through this journey, getting people to that diverse place where, these are the foods, the template that you can work around. And I just see it play out in a similar fashion. I don't see, there's many different roads to get to a place. If you're trying to achieve something really, really specific, okay, we'll use a therapeutic diet for a period of time. But you can still achieve some of the same goals eating vastly different foods. And until you, open and say, I'm open to anything being able to do that, then I think you're going to be, hindered in your practice. And I love too from the story about the milk thing. That's just like, whole issue with sort of the public, we go about trying to, change things in the public health sphere. But I just, it really starts by just being open, being curious and being open. And I'll be like Chris too, if tomorrow we get a huge study that proves, all the refined food that we're eating is like, decreases mortality and is better than the paleo diet or whatever. Okay, I'll start telling my people to, I'm not, you're not attached to anything, but using basic principles, using person's experience and remaining open, I think are the direction for moving forward. So,
yeah. And just to add to that, I really, one of the things I try to do with my clients is emphasize the fact that they are the expert in their own body. So, I'm an expert in my field, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert in their body. Yeah. And all of this research and science that we have, it's potentially helpful information, but it doesn't necessarily 100% apply to every single person out there. So I'm very adamant about teaching my clients to learn their own needs and learn what feels good for them and learn how to know whether something's working or not for them. And that applies to food, but it also applies to, like you were saying before about a career path. Like if you're doing something that doesn't feel good for you, whether or not somebody says it's the right thing to do or that, like, that's the key to success. If it doesn't feel right for you, then it's not right. So I think just teaching people in general how to come back to their own intuition, listening to their bodies, listening to how they feel, like using emotions as a tool, not like letting your emotions drive all your decisions. But, if something feels bad, like thinking about why does this feel bad? Or like, what's this trying to show me? Because feeling bad emotionally is the same way as feeling bad physically. It's showing that there's something out of alignment, maybe, an injury, or one of my business people that I follow was talking about it. Like if you put your hand on a hot stove, that pain is telling you, get your hand out, like move. Same thing goes with emotional pain, where if you're feeling a lot of like sadness and lack of interest and, just anxiety, that kind of thing, instead of saying, oh, I'm a bad person because I feel this way, thinking that emotion is pointing to something being out of alignment and doing the work to discover what that is and then changing what you're doing. So I think people really need to be encouraged to do the work. And again, it's work. It's not, you don't just like wake up one day and know exactly what you want to do. A lot of times, like my own personal experience, it took doing things I didn't want to do to say, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm doing something different. So you do have to go through the process of learning what you don't want and learning what doesn't feel good. But always coming back to like how you feel and how you're experiencing your life is important. And even as a Christian, like we have the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit is guiding us, and we can get, divine inspiration and divine intervention with the decisions that we're making if we actually sit back and listen. So I think just recognizing our own ability to change what's happening in our lives based on what we're experiencing internally and valuing our own internal intuition, knowledge, experience above what an expert says or above what, what's popular right now in the health and fitness world or what's popular in, our culture, that kind of thing.
Laura, this has been really, really wonderful. I could keep talking to you the rest of the day, and I can't wait to meet you physically in person. We're not too far away. A few hours. I want to give you some time too to obviously share a little bit more specifically about some of the work that you're doing, but didn't know before you went there if there was any sort of maybe last story or verse, experience, piece of knowledge, wisdom that you wanted to share with folks before we end.
Well, as far as just the first question about what I'm doing, or I think you were saying something about like where people might be able to find more about me.
Yeah.
So right now, I was saying to Rob before we got on the call, like I am in a little bit of a transitional phase with my career at the time of this recording, which is in February. But I have the opportunity to work with me one-on-one, generally is always available to the right people, as we were saying. So I do work with women who are looking to optimize their health and, get their health into a place where they're confident they're doing the right things for their bodies so that they can move on and do bigger and better things with their lives. So that is something that generally is always available for the most part. If you're listening to this 5 years from now, maybe not, but at least in 2019, that should be available. And then I do have a group coaching program that I'm currently running. It's called a beta. So what a beta is basically you start with a new program and you're refining it and developing it and testing it with people who are going through it. And then once that beta is over, that's when you launch the official program. So the course that we're currently in with the beta version is called Fed and Fearless. So Fed and Fearless is a program designed to help women become the experts of their own bodies, help them understand how they need to eat, how they need to exercise, how they need to rest, do self-care activities, how they need to structure their day so that they feel their best physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And then also helping them start to do the deeper work of digging into, self-talk issues like negative self-talk, how they think about themselves, what they think about the purpose of their lives, like what they think about, just overall the meaning of life. It's an online program, so there's only so much that we can dig into the meaning of life, but It is something where I really want you to start thinking about that stuff and getting your priorities in order. So that way, the health stuff is just a way to support this lifelong journey of spiritual development. But that program in the next couple of months should be rolling out as more of an official program. So, that would be a potential way that women can work with me where they want to join that program and be part of that community where we're diving deeper into these topics and this conversation. And then as far as leaving anyone with words of wisdom, I think what we were saying before about becoming your own expert is really important. And again, it's not saying that you have to do things perfectly. It's not saying that you need to do it all alone. Something that I wrote about on Instagram recently was the concept of, I feel like it's very popular right now to say, be your own hero, be your own superhero. Like you have the power to take care of yourself and, you're in 100% control of your life. And I think that's garbage information. Like, I do think that you are in control of your perception of life. Like if something can happen to you and you get to decide how you react to it and how you, think about it and feel about it and the stories you tell yourself about the meaning of that event. But bad stuff happens, right? Like, if a woman has a miscarriage, you're not going to tell her, you're the superhero of your life. You can fix that. And, you can be fertile all on your own. Like, I just think it puts a lot of pressure on people to figure it all out, to be perfect, to always be strong, to not have negative emotions, to not feel weak, to not feel like they're not in control, because we know that we're not. And to really look at this as a partnership between you and God, where God knows everything. He knows what's going to happen to you. He knows, everything that you've done, everything that you will do, and he knows what's best for you. And we have that opportunity to have a relationship with him where he's guiding us. But also recognizing that like you're not in control. So you can do your best. You can put the effort in, you can do everything quote unquote right and still not necessarily get the exact result that you wanted to get, or bad stuff can happen and get in the way or derail your progress. So I find it to be freeing to look at it as you're not in control and you can do your best and show up every day as your best self and, make those decisions that are in alignment and learn what alignment looks like for you and take charge of the choices that you're making. But ultimately leaving the results up to God takes a lot of pressure off ourselves. Yeah. If something doesn't go well, or maybe your health isn't improving the way you thought it would, or things happen that are outside of your control, recognizing that it's not your fault and it's not your responsibility to save the world or to be perfect or, to make everybody's lives around you perfect. Yeah. So I just like people to remember that it's kind of a dance between learning yourself, learning what works for you, learning what doesn't work for you, and creating clear boundaries around the way that you're living your life, but releasing responsibility of the results and letting God take care of the rest. So I do think having someone as a mentor can be really helpful. It's one of the reasons why I personally I have 3 coaches and I'm in 5 different educational programs right now, learning about mostly business stuff, because business is a whole nother world of education that I didn't get in college or grad school. But the amount of growth I've been able to have in my own personal and business development because I've hired somebody to help guide me has been amazing. And so whatever you're trying to accomplish, it's always going to be better to have somebody mentoring you and leading you through that process and not doing it 100% on your own. So that might be your pastor, that might be your spouse, that might be a friend, it might be a coach, it might be your doctor, but just having someone there to help guide you, I think is really, really valuable. And it's important to invest in yourself in a way that allows you to make progress and doesn't put it all on your shoulders.
Yeah. It's really, really beautiful. I just thank you again for your vulnerability, your authenticity this time, sharing all this and knowing the work that you're doing, personally and with folks every day. I think one of the most beautiful things that just warms my heart with gratitude and love is knowing all the people that maybe I haven't even met yet physically, and knowing the space that they hold. And that's the way that we cover the globe. You hold your space with that person, and you hold your space with that person, and then suddenly we've covered the whole globe. I don't have to worry about all these other things. Like, let me just focus what's in my sphere right now. And beautiful thoughts on perspective. You're the only person who can change your own perspective. We can objectively change what we see should be your perspective, but maybe someone's perspective doesn't change. So completely in alignment, and totally agree that it's about that perspective. And sometimes bad things happen, and it's how you react to it and how you respond and how you carry yourself, and don't beat yourself up. So we're all just human beings. So well, thank you again. I really, really appreciate this. And as I mentioned earlier, can't wait to hopefully meet you in person and continue this dialogue. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Rob. It was really great to have the opportunity to talk about this stuff, since there's not a lot of podcasts that are necessarily covering these topics. Yeah,
I'm trying to, I love medicine, I love functional medicine, I love nutrition, but, and a lot of folks who I'm talking to, they've been on podcasts, so I'm tired of asking them the same questions that they've been asking a million times. So these are these, I think, more important conversations to have. So thank you for stepping into it.
Yeah, well, keep up the great work. I think it's important to have just this space for people like myself and like you. And I'm sure there's lots of other people out there that would love to have these kind of conversations and would love to hear these conversations. So I encourage you to keep doing the tough work of running a podcast, because it is challenging. But I think, even just what you told me about the impact my podcast has had on you, you'll have that impact on other people. So, keep it up.
Yeah. Well, man, well, for folks, listening, I've shared this probably in different podcasts before, but, it was a podcast listening to Chris Kresser and then eventually you guys that started me on this whole thing. So there is great power. So maybe someone out there is listening and you either have a podcast or haven't started it and you're kind of doubting, whether this is worth it. You could have the opportunity to impact one person's life in a dramatic, profound way. And I was so lucky last year to finally meet Chris and tell him that. He was just like, whoa. Encouragement to everyone, and maybe you try it and it doesn't work out, and like you mentioned, maybe that's not the right thing, but you won't know until you try it. So thanks, Laura.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rob.
Thank you for your presence and willingness to receive a new narrative, a passionate perspective, and perhaps a deeper sense of connection with our collective purpose. Please share this podcast with any and all that you believe will benefit from its intention to relieve one's doing and engage one's being. Please share your comments about the conversation on our podcast page and leave a review in iTunes so that the voices in this space can spread to all ears ready to receive it. Music credit goes to Dillingham for their song Vessel. Remain open, stay curious, and forever be love.
You walked on fire, and I know you tried.